Hello, metric modulators. This is Jeff Bowders down here at Musicians Institute, and today we're going to talk about some metric modulation ideas. So this is Unit 8, and we're going to start off with basically using a 3/16 note phrase to act as a new modulation, but we're not modulating to a new tempo. We're more or less just superimposing this phrase onto the original tempo. So it sounds like we're speeding up, but we're still adhering to the original tempo. So the very first thing that we have to do is get comfortable with hearing this 3-note phrase within a 16th note sequence. And that's what exercise 1 is. So here we go. Okay, so now that we have that established, we're going to start to apply those accents to the voicings of the kit here, mainly the kick and the snare drum. So if you notice, it's every third 16th note. We're going to play a straight 8th note hi-hat pattern, but on every accent of that 3-note pattern, the one and the and, we're going to go alternate between kick and snare, kick and snare. So it has kind of a boom chick kind of feel to it already. Sounds like this. Here we go. Okay, so now that you're starting to get a feel for how this phrase can apply to a kick and snare pattern, we're going to remove that 8th note hi-hat pattern that we had there, and we're just going to line the hi-hat up with whatever kick and snare pattern it is. So there's not that reinforcement of that original 4/4 feel. So it really starts to feel like we're shifting the time now, we're modulating the time. But always remember, you still got to count that original time or else you'll just lose it. We're not counting the modulation. We're still counting the original count, the original 1-anda, 2-anda, even though we're phrasing this 3/16 note over it each time. Sounds like this. Listen to the metronome, count. Okay, so now that you can start to feel how taking this 3/16 note phrase can really lend itself to a new time feel, we're going to play a straight original time feel and then add this implied metric modulation to it. We're going to play 2 bars of a straight 8th note feel adhering to the 2 and 4 on the snare drum, 1 and 3 on the kick drum, to the original tempo, original count. And then for the last 2 bars, we're going to modulate into that 3/16 modulation with the kick and snare pattern identical to what we just did in the previous exercise. Sounds like this. Let's go. All right, so now that we have a feel for playing that 8th note, 2 bars of 8th note groove right before that implied modulated 16th note groove, you notice it might have sounded a little bit weird going from an 8th note feel on the ride on the hi-hat to just kind of the superimposed quarter note feel. Just to make it a little bit more cohesive, I'm going to play a quarter note groove for 2 bars instead of the 8th note groove for 2 bars, and then we'll play that metric modulated 2-bar 16th note groove we just played, just so you can start to hear that it might mesh a little bit better when you maintain the same ride feel. Sounds like this. All right, now that we have that established, what we're going to do now, we're going to shift gears a little bit. We're going to take that same 3/16 note phrase, but we're going to voice it in a way that almost feels like a halftime feel. Halftime just means in drummer language, really, we're just putting the snare drum on beat 3 and bass drums on beat 1. We're going to still make it a 4-bar phrase, and it's going to be 2 bars of the straight 8th note groove that we've been doing. But now the last 2 bars is still adhering to the 16th note, 3/16th note phrase that we've been applying for this whole unit. But now, rather than always playing a kick or a snare on every 3/16th note, it's basically going to go kick, hi-hat, snare, hi-hat, kick, hi-hat, snare, hi-hat. In essence, counting it 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, as you would in a typical halftime feel. But we're doing the modulation here, so it's a little bit different. Let's try it. All right, so here we're going to expand upon this 3/16th note phrase that we've been working on. So far, we've only really been focusing on the first note of each 3-note grouping, really accenting the first 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Now, we're actually going to focus on the first and the third one. So we'll really think of it as like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. Still counting 16th notes. So we're still counting 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a, right? Still 16th notes, that's not changing, but we're just changing where the accent is. That's what this first preliminary exercise is on the snare drum. This is how it goes. All right, now that you kind of understand that new accent pattern that we're going to work on, we're going to apply that to the hi-hat. We're going to use that phrase only on the hi-hat. So really, when we break it down, it's going to start 3, 4, 1, and a 2 E and 3 E, a 4, and so on. But we're going to play kick drum on 1 and 3, snare on 2 and 4, just to give it a groove, right? We want some sort of groove establishment here so that we can figure out how this phrase works against the established time. And it sounds like this. All right, so now that we have a feel for that, we're getting all 3 of these voices here working together. This is where we're going to start to align the kick and the snare with that new ride pattern. And just as we did with the single note before, now we're going to do it with this new accent pattern. And it sounds like this. All right, now you can start to hear how this new accent pattern really changes the whole feel of things. It really starts to outline almost a triplet-based shuffle feel, right? But the idea is we're not playing triplets. This isn't a true shuffle. We're still counting 16th notes. It's a superimposition, right? We're not changing note values. So what we're going to do as we did previously, we're going to make a 4-bar phrase. First 2 bars are a straight ahead groove, and then we're going to apply this new implied metric modulation to the last 2 bars. Sounds like this. Here we go. All right, for this last exercise of this unit, we're going to do the same thing that we did with the single 3/16th note phrase, applying that halftime feel to it. Same kind of idea, 4-bar phrase, 2 bars of straight 8th notes, and then the last 2 bars are going to be this implied metric modulation in the supposed halftime feel. Check it out, here it goes.